afternoon, everyone. Now we're going to be addressing digital payments, anti-fraud, purchasing experience. We noticed that we have developed a lot in that sense. In the old days, all we had were invoices, credit, and debit cards. We talked about cryptocurrencies, and we're just celebrated our 2 years anniversary of PIX. We have invisible payments being carried out, but also face payments. And with that, we see a growing need of fighting against fraud. For every new payment method, there are thousands and thousands fraud options being born. So we're going to be talking about that today. I would like you to introduce yourselves quickly, please. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandro. I'm responsible for the risk management part of AMI. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. It's going to be a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ojima. I'm the Innovation Director for First Tech. And once more, thank you for the invitation. I hope that I contribute to this panel. Obrigado. Good afternoon. My name is Guilherme Cato. I'm CTO of Doutor Consulta and the leader of the technology committees for media. And thank you for this invitation. Let's go. My name is Fábio Murakami. I'm a product director for FinTech Magalu. It's a branch of Magalu for financial services and payment. And I'm in charge of the product sector, individuals, open finance. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Ulysses Okamoto. I'm responsible for fraud prevention at Itaú, but also credit card fraud, digital accounts. In 2 years and a half that I've been back to the country, I spent more than 10 years working overseas with anti-fraud, like the United States, Latin America, and I'm also here at your disposal to share information. Thank you. Now I'd like to comment on what you just said. Is it true that we are a champion or vice champion in terms of fraud prevention? Is that true? When I founded Jinjin 6 years ago, that was a reality. Is that still true? Yes, that's still true. Brazilian frauders, unfortunately, were leaders in this ranking. They're one of the most creative and efficient ones in the world. We actually export the fraud technology to other countries, including Mexico. What I see that is different here when you compare to other countries in Mexico is their organizational level. So Mexico has a very heavy organized crime backed by the drug trafficking. But in pragmatical terms, in terms of creativity and flexibility and innovation, our fraud agents here, they're very creative. This is just a curiosity, but I saw so many cases in which you had a computer virus that you would open this code and the comments were there written in Portuguese. So that's very common. So they adapt what happens here in Brazil to an external reality. So everything that arises here, the world is paying attention to what's going on in Brazil because inevitably it's going to take place elsewhere as well. All right, a very good question about that, but I'm not going to start with it because it would be a slap in the face. So I'm going to get back to PIX. So next year, on the 16th, we're going to celebrate the 2 years anniversary of PIX, 2 years of new fraud attempts as well. So I would like to hear from you the digital wallets. We know that we experienced a lot, but what did we learn from the frauds against PIX and what are their impacts? Is it the onboarding process, the journey? So what have we been able to do so as to fight against frauds in the PIX system? Well, honestly, I can speak on behalf of AMI and my experience in the past in financial services. Well, fighting against fraud, it starts with the onboarding process. So before the advent of PIX, we need to have a compliance process and QSC compliance, so you had a very smooth and easy to make journey for the client. Because if you get to know the client, you're able to fight against a lot of the frauds. And now PIX is a new thing. So the game now is the pace or the speed in which you're able to detect this fraud. Because PIX At the same time that it presents um, something very comfortable to be able to do a transaction 24/7 from anywhere using your mobile phone, it's also a doorway for you to try and fraud someone. So we learned so much with this cashless reality. So trying to use Pix, and besides the onboarding process, we have been trying to carry out a detection for which kind of devices people are using, so they don't have gaps to connect from another device in a very short amount of time, because they can um, get access to funds they shouldn't. So we start this journey from the very onboarding process, and we learn throughout the journey until the payment moment, or the moment that you're providing a more complex and financial service like insurance. So we have been implementing that gradually. We start with the onboarding process, and with the transactions, we evolve that idea with partners and data to fight these profiles and those risks that are new for us. So when you mention a device, you mean that this is a new analysis tool, right? And for fake accounts. So is this data correct? Is this person real or not? So if you see a different device, the frauder, they are able to do that, right? So how have you been coping with that in Magazine Luiza? Well, in Magazine Luiza, we have digital accounts called Magalu Pay. It's it's a process very similar to the one that you mentioned before. So you have this onboarding process, you validate people's faces and IDs, you have this extra concern, but I'm gonna present to you another layer to comment on that. So what we have been doing in terms of validations, a digital wallet, it has many retail transactions that allows you to come up with scores. So you grade your client. So when the client gets into this platform, we can grade them in terms of risks in purchases. So we do that for retail, but we also do that for digital wallets and banking as a service. So it's a type of information that we're making available for the market. We're working with our own information. We work with the API for banking as a service, but these things go hand in hand with those information. So we have digital accounts transactions. But the way we do in Magazine Luiza, you have digital accounts and retail stores and banking as a service. In banking as a service, you're going to come up with banks using the APIs. And people always debate about the PIX limit, or there should be no restrictions. There are situations in which you can authorize, and the risk is up for the employer. So at first, people would say, you need to validate. But when you're talking about immediate payment, you got to be worried about that, because the type of headaches that you're going to face are different. So retailers, obviously, they are worried about money laundering, but they're less worried about digital wallets. So it's different when you compare to digital wallets or banking as a service. All right, so in your opinions about PIX, so we have PIX credit and the international PIX system being developed. So the way you see it, are we prepared for that? Or are we still learning with regular PIX frauds in the domestic usage? Can we face, are we ready for this new reality to come true? So we know how much credit cards are used. We know that that's a no-brainer. We know that. But what are your concerns, both in terms of PIX credit, but also in international and overseas usage? Well, from the perspective of a credit card provider, as you probably know, it's always part of the central bank sandbox. So we have this preliminary stage, and it tends to be another option for consumers to pay when they're doing their checkout. So from a risk perspective, it's quite similar to the risk that you already face in PIX nowadays, because it's much more associated with the channel you log in, so the device, the telephone that you're actually using to carry out the payment, than the credit card itself. So that in that sense, all that we have learned with PIX in terms of accounts, for instance, is going to be important so that we can prevent frauds in the future in a moment where the market decided to expand this usage. Now, in terms of these international peaks, which are spin-offs per se, I would say it's promising because it's going to be easy for clients when they're carrying out their payments. The way I see it, we have a long way to go, especially in terms of converging to the solutions. So one day in the future, the client can split down their payments in a part being paid by Pix on a credit card and the other in their account. This design is not ready yet. These are just ideas. Obviously, for fraud prevention, we have been experiencing a lot, and those frauds, they grew because of Pix. So obviously, it's still something that we need to learn a lot. It's a learning curve, but I think we're going to benefit from it in the future. All right, just to comment on what you said, Ulisses, Pix was a revolution in the payment world. At first, Pix was replacing our TED, a type of bank wire transfer in Brazil. And then they moved to e-commerce. So when you select, would I rather use Pix or credit card? When we look at our end users, they will still uh, they will still like to use a credit card because there are benefits linked to the credit card that Pix does not have. So that's it. So when you think about fraud, you should also be worried about credit card frauds because our e-commerce is growing, but fraud is also growing with it, right? So how can you prepare for that? So end consumers, they're becoming more and more anxious over time. So we're anxious to make a purchase. Many times we don't check if the shop has any security measures, and all we do is carry out the payment. And many consumers, they have negative experiences with this kind of online purchases. The same goes for the store. When stores are trying to achieve their purpose of selling, they don't actually use the right parameters so that we can block fraud there or to identify a fraudulent transaction. So let's say you got to fill out this form, and this form has 50 fields. So you're already implementing tension in this form. And in this world, no one wants tension. People are very anxious. So this friction is something that is going to prevent you from buying or selling. So our greatest challenge here, not only with Pix, but Pix did help a lot, is we're presenting this transaction and to have a frictionless transaction and a safe transaction at the same time. All right, I just want to comment on that. As I'm a retailer, we want Pix to evolve because it's a great product. As Brazilians, we are early adopters of these new technologies. And of course, you can do it slowly, and there are some restrictions that bank impose to clients, but we need to raise awareness as well. So Brazil has the chance to stand out in terms of technologies and payments. So people, foreign people, they can develop a new version of Pix, which didn't work. But if we wait too long here in Brazil, we're not going to get that. So we need to raise awareness because Brazilians want that. If you look at the northeast region of Brazil, the smallest of stores, they're not taking credit cards anymore. They're taking Pix. So it's good to understand that. It's to understand where this money is going from. Or if you're doing tax evasion, and there's also financial inclusion. So you have this payment method that is not reliant upon cash. So it's a huge potential. And us who work in the retail sector, we obviously we want to raise that awareness slowly, but it's a huge opportunity. Obviously, there is the fraud and the person who commits fraud. So there is the transaction itself, the fraud, and in the onboarding, you actually focus on the person. So throughout your journey, and if you can comment on that later on, I want to understand what works as a benchmark or a playbook. I always like to get out of a seminar with something to implement. So I want to ask from you, in terms of an onboarding process. And the challenge that we face, that is have a frictionless process, but at the same time to be a safe process. So matching this user experience and the security of the client at the end of the day is a challenge. So we know that's a thing, and you know that the chain always breaks on the weakest of its link. So you know that people lose money because of Pix fronts. Sometimes it was up to their relatives. But anyway, I want to ask you, did you learn anything to that sense? Like, this has to be implemented because this works. And it should be mandatory for the market to implement it and not this Pandora box. And by the way, Pandora box, I'm actually going to ask about it again later on.
I can start talking about we have this look of the person who commits fraud, and we should never forget that it's about retail, right? So one of the benefits, not only what we do, but how we do. So we are very close to the production, commercial areas. We always have very good ideas, insights. Our whole onboarding is conducted based on customer experience, and we working very close to the commercial area and customers. You will be able to have a more incremental idea because the onboarding. Uh, I might uh, I might know your collaborator, your supplier, because fraud is everywhere. So there's an incremental journey. So even considering documentation, this journey will be implemented once you have the services from your digital wallet. So for you to check your balance, the cashback, so we have an authentication that is simpler, confirmation via token through email or phone. And once this journey gets more complex because of, for instance, a PIX, a TAD, financial service, or um, a loan, biometry, facial recognition, and so on. So that is the first journey. And having the benefit, checking the regulatory part of it, and everything that we need to have, prevention of money laundering and terrorism is key for our organization. It has been authorized by the central bank. So, how is this experience fluid through our app, through our portal, and the legal department? So you have the authentication in the journey, the complexity, and how it is considering the product and other areas. And as for the transitional, we need to use what we have, and also in the retail, we collect behavioral information in order to establish in order to establish all the requirements and also the risk of customers. We need to also to work with different partners, domestic and international partners as well. We have some partners that also work in different markets for us to be more to anticipate any kind of fraud, and all our tools should be based on data knowledge. So it is about that, and we also need to be to get to know about the person who commits fraud. Today we have different mechanisms to identify frauds, technologies, and we need to take care of it, to be very concerned of it, or any behavior, geolocalization, and so on. So what we have been perceiving on the market is that if the customer has a 3DS solution and hires a third one for fraud analysis, And another solution, so if you see the timeline, this whole cost of these solutions, they will be, you will need to put these costs on the product. But we also have other more efficient solutions, 3DS, 3DS as well, because, well, it generates friction and we need to pay for that, right? Once we see that the compliance of it, the and we don't need to have that. So considering the flags, the payment markets, because we are talking about click pay, so it brings benefits. Thus, different devices, anti-fraud, we are able to reduce that and be more efficient to be able to deliver a user experience that is going to be better. That is the pathway. We need to be looking to the market and also be very attentive with the technologies, the cost of the product, user experience, and so on. I like what you've mentioned because it's not only about risk and safety, it's also about business. If you have a good multi-fraud, anti-fraud, I think that knowing the customer, know your customer, having the data, it's going to be essential. And there are different examples as well, because it's important to have. And if you're online, then you might be asked for more information. Super dangerous. Having the anti-fraud and safety interference. So that's the way. Yeah, and also authorization, fraud prevention. As for Magalu, our communication means in practice, at Magalu, we work with platform stores. We have a series of operations on the system, Magalu, Netshoes, Akforme, and every time you have a relation with these operations, you have onboarding. So now, any operation with one single registration, you are able to sign up to all these platforms, and the same subscription or registration will be made available. So this whole process, this gradual process for you to qualify the base is based on biometry, identification. This will be using the cost of an operation, and it will make available for the market and transform this into API so that you will be able to have a fintech and other services to make it easier. Good. So you've mentioned about this empowerment of area of risk. You have security, you have anti-fraud, and um, and also strategy. Because if there is any comparison, the HR, people's development, that has to be in a strategic pillar. So do you think that on the market as a whole, and you can mention your own experience, this mindset of the strategic pillar and area of risk, is it part today of anything? Do you have a decision power? How is your experience about that? I think that fraud, it's about seeking for safety, but things are changing. Our CPO is here. And I went to talk about product and marketing and also fraud and safety, even though it is still a little bit obscure. It's a dark cloud, untouched. We don't know about legal, technology. So I think that there are things missing. Those guys who are developing new products, they need to be very attentive to that. The best example is when you have a product. It's about the onboarding, right? You design a very perfect onboarding, but safety doesn't work. And changing onboard is hard work, right? There are different screens, rows, so the onboarding is the background, right? Yeah. And it's very difficult to do that without it. And with all the anti-fraud initiatives, it is a process. I would like to complement that as for the financial market, we see areas of risk, this power of decision making. As for fraud risk, they are directed by regulations. And business risk, it's about to what extent products and services can, uh, can keep up, as we were mentioning, that unfortunately fraud is a reality. Fraud and also we need to be very attentive not to have risks. So we need to have correct investments, level of control, safety, everything that has to be has to be well balanced. And at the bank, we see that happening all the time. Committees are taking actions based on risks, but the business area, they seek for this subsidiary with specialists, and they provide recommendations. But yes, we see a concern, because if we ask here, if we have a poll here, and if we ask you how many of you have been through a fraud, I think that the majority of you will raise your hand, right? So, and also the regulators, central bank, it is an increasing concern for companies to protect, and also the crime. It is very interesting, these professionals, because as for payment, means of payment, today it is a strategy. And it's interesting that risk professionals, they have a technical education, and they are able to see the database and come up with a solution. So it has been changing quite a lot. I've seen a very radical change. I just would like to compliment because I've been in two different worlds, two different experiences. A well-regulated space, Itaú, and our retail market that we are browsing for financial solutions. And we opted to be regulated because then we can have an empowerment for the risks area. But it is also important to share with you how the risk area position itself, even considering Itaú Bank, because if it is a problem, anti-business, but it's not like that, what we have been trying, because we are fighting in order to be a more desirable area within all the methodologies, agility. So it's very natural to deal with these risks and the conception of products and services. But the risks, if we put as part of the solution, we always try to create this concept. Everything is okay since you have the controls and a statement. I agree. It not only depends on the organization, but how the risk management process positions itself. And in our case, we need to be in the front line and do not leave behind operational risk, regulatory issues, imaging. So I also would like to share that because it also depends on the risk management. Yes, and your this posture pro business.
So it's about how other people see you and how you present yourself. So you touched on something very interesting, and I would like to hear from you. So in the old days, these anti-fraud and risk professionals, they used to be people who knew how to use tools. So you had many suppliers. Do you know how to use this one or that one? So you would design workflows and processes. And over time, we have been experiencing this change to data. So we have been building this, and we are now needing scientists, anti-fraud scientists now. So we're moving more to forecasts. So the fraud went through the onboarding process, but they might commit a fraud or not. So that behavior, do they use this device or that other device? So we have these small tools per se. So how do you see this creation of anti-fraud teams moving forward? So upscale, soft skill, and hard skill in a way, making the most of the knowledge we already have, or on the other hand, really creating this new job and starting from scratch. I want to hear from you guys, and I can give my personal opinion, which is a spoiler actually. So I think it should be a hybrid version of both, because you cannot come up with a new profession. It's not that quick. You need some time to age that. But in the practical terms, how have you been doing to hire people? Or like a general comment. What we noticed in terms of skills and data management, that is a basic requirement, not only in terms of data protection and risk prevention. And as you asked in the last question, a playbook, right? So data, of course, is an investment. It's a no-brainer for anyone that wants to be successful. So that speaks to segmentation, to different audiences, to customize approaches. So what we see in pragmatical terms, data engineering has been evolving slower than the actual ability of professionals to work with this data. So you notice people's backgrounds and training, their highly advanced statistics, mathematics, that are able to implement theories, but in pragmatic terms, when they're trying to use the information data, they're not there the way they would like to. So we have partially effective models and partial analysis as well. So I think that to meet the demands and expectations of what we expect today, we need to have a counterpart in terms of infrastructure investment. That's very important. So it goes through the priority that each institution or organization is going to assign to this. So in terms of reutilizing knowledge, we can do better. Obviously, if it's more urgent, invariably, the search is going to be for trained professionals and not training professionals. But obviously, we have some professionals that could do that. Well, first of all, it's super cool to hire people from other areas, but the learning curve is large for someone who's gonna work with risks and security. But to comment on what you just mentioned, Ulysses, a person that comes from business to work in the risk sector, what kind of risk can I take to scale my business up? So it's not necessarily a no. So it's tricky. It's a tricky learning curve. They need to understand a lot about security tools and data. But if we're able to match those things, we're going to have a very good outcome. The very challenge of finding personnel on the market make companies invest in technologies to make those processes automated to mitigate risks right from the get-go. So that's a huge challenge. So it all comes down to a manual analysis, right? Yes, it does. I experienced that when I hired people for GG to manage the anti-fraud sector. And it's entirely different from today's needs with bits. So 6 years ago, you needed to understand your sale for a bunch of suppliers and tools. And nowadays, you have data and be able to analyze those data is different. So at the old days, people didn't know how to use an SQL. Now they do. They have to do that to come up with anti-fraud intelligence. So that's why I wanted to touch on that point. I think we're going to be lacking professionals. So obviously, we have been using credit cards, debit cards, invoices, installments, PICs, etc. And frauds are evolving along with those things. And as we're talking about that, and I'm gonna use some of my personal experience just to give a context. I didn't come from financial market or telecommunications. I actually started a fintech company. The first time that I was able to pay attention to a credit card workflow, it always seemed preposterous that the weakest link would lose if there is any issues. But at the end of the day, what we see is that you have, on the one hand, organized crime, so people who commit fraud, they are criminals. They have Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, and I was lucky enough to get into in one of those groups to actually understand how they work. So I wrote down my phone number afterwards. But what I can say is they are organized. Now, cutscenes. Let's get back to it. For many years, each player, either being a provider, a digital wallet, or retail store, or whatever that is, we have this mindset, this open banking mindset, open finance, open data, open everything basically. So for banks, fintechs, and players to foster users to open the data up on behalf of a better provision of services, right? I know this is harsh, so I'm gonna be on your side, okay? So us, did we get to the point that we're actually working together and sharing data amongst each other so as to prevent fraud and fight against it? And don't have that Gollum's my precious behavior from the Lord of the Rings. So I'm gonna take charge, and they're gonna commit fraud elsewhere because here I'm the Lord. Because you have to bear in mind that this is affecting the financial sector and users. Because if they were frauded, they're not gonna trust other services. So I want to know if the mindset has been changing on this side of things. Well, on behalf of AMI, and this started back then, some years ago, with this positive subscription, and now with open finance, we see large players and suppliers that working as consortiums. And what are the most important benefits of that? Obviously, they respect data protection laws, all the legal matters that the LGPD presented that helps both users and companies. So the user, they have this right to authorize access to the data. And when they do it, they do this as a consortium. And on the other hand, as players, we can extract from this source as long as we keep the source up to date. So if we think about old names, add list, for instance, bad list. If it wasn't a bad list, it's going to be a WhatsApp group. So you're exchanging information or doing networking. It's more informal, right? Yes, that's right. So nowadays, in a more formal way, actually, there are providers that are working with this consortium format, meaning that they access data in a system, and if you want to be part of the system or data, you have to commit to share your knowledge, your data, and then you also have to retrofit the system. And being able to detect or not these frauds, you'll have some financial benefits because you'll be taxed less, as you don't need to have the volume, a total volume on your own. You need to have the volume for a consortium. So many players are working with that, and we believe this is going to be a huge success. All right, now I'm going to let you know how old I am. I have been working in the payment sector since the time that credit cards would be magnetic. So these brands, when they got in Brazil, so whenever you close a door for fraud, they will open another one. So fraud migrates from a place to the other. So we tried cards with cheap magnetic cards, and we would sort out some of the issues in terms of the transaction itself with a physical card. So we would forget the transaction of the card, like e-commerce. And after the pandemic, this grew up exponentially. So the volume of this type of frauds is significant, and we have to mitigate those frauds. Credit card suppliers, they have always paid attention to that, but they didn't find a solution for it. And nowadays, those suppliers, they have solutions based on totemization, but it's a totem created by the supplier. And why is that important? I'm not saying that me as a merchant that I have a single credential. So someone subscribed for me on my behalf, and this was authenticated by the supplier, by the bank, Master, Visa, whatever that is, and then they give me a credential. And that credential is going to work for that app and that device. So let's say this device was produced for Magalu's apps, and I'm using this credential in 99's app. They're going to block it, even if it's online. Why? Because the devices didn't match or the credentials didn't match. And there are more efficient things getting into the market. Recently, I have been talking to the credit card suppliers, and we're talking about CryptPay. And for those who are curious, you can Google it up, click to pay, so you have this icon now. You have the architecture and the structure, which is very similar to Pix. So you subscribe your credit card information with all your data, as if you were subscribing a Pix key. So when you get into the store that has that icon on their website, you're going to click on that icon to carry out a payment, and automatically they're going to fill it in with all your credit card data that are protected. You can see how easy it is, right? So you select how you want to carry out the payment method, and that payment will be carried out in a safe way. So we are reducing friction to the user, ensuring safety, but also presenting a positive experience, which is great for the user. So obviously, when we're talking about fraud, we're always looking for ways to mitigate it, but that's not enough. We have to be always looking for new technologies, like we mentioned on 3DS. We have been hearing about 3DS 2.0 since 2018, 2019, and a lot of people haven't implemented it yet to this day. All right, I just want to comment on that, that from my personal experience, yes, there is an exchange in terms of data and information. For those who are part of this knowledge field, we would say that this is the only competition-less market because we're competing against those who commit fraud. So Let's say as long as illegal money or capital does not go to crime organizations, that's enough. So let's say we're reducing their success rate. That's valid. So obviously we have some experience with peers and other colleagues that are here today of exchanging information. For instance, this website, they know who their clients are. They are able to carry out this profiling process with the risk assessment, and they're able to convey this analysis to banks in different terminals so that the bank can make different decisions based on the risk level. What does that mean? It means that a transaction coming from Magalu, a Magalu client using the app, they are faithful to that, and they know that is a low risk transaction, they're going to send me for approval in a different process for a client that they don't know or have no information about. So obviously you have a different process for that, and it presents many benefits for both for good clients, but also for criminals. The same way, even if you have a fraudulent transaction that was successful or not, that does not mean that this criminal has won. Because let's say you're gonna deliver an asset, a tangible thing. Even if you're able to see that in time so that they can cancel the sale, the merchandise is never gonna get to this criminal. So they're not gonna capitalize from the product, and they're not gonna get this stolen amount. So to have this exchange of data with agility, I see this is growing, and is one of the ways to go with the tools that we have to get to the sophistication level that we want and to be effective as we want. Well, I asked that because, especially when we're talking about PICs, this becomes very obvious for those who are part of the market and was a victim of this fraud. You're the first ones to be hacked. So they hack into your social media. Uh, you're probably gonna look it up on LinkedIn or Google, Facebook to find someone who works with that. It also happens with us when someone that is close to you have this pics and a relative made a mistake, and sometimes they give much more money than they would like to. So the way I see that is that this is not well structured, at least not from the perspective of the victim. So who should I look for? Who should I call? So this guy works for this fintech. Do you know this guy who worked with this payment method? So it becomes too informal, and you don't have a good flow that we probably will have to design for this end user. Because in terms of justice, imprisonment, detaining people, we're not talking about that, are we? Brazilians are so used to losing things that it's not really about detaining the person who committed fraud. It's about getting your money back. So we are able to see where this money went to at the end of, and with PIX, this is slightly more hidden because you would know the bank, the branch, uh, but now with just an email, you don't know where it is, where the money is. So you know in theory where this money is going through. So I would like to know from you, do you think we're lacking this last mile or not? I want to know if you think about that, you are decision makers of the area. Well, particularly Pix has an additional challenge. You have this fragmentation and the money is spread. So the fraud starts somewhere, then you open thousands of accounts, and then it's segmented. So that's why the central bank has been more thorough in terms of opening accounts. But I agree with you, this exchange has not been well structured for PIX. When you're talking about traditional payment methods, credit cards, this process is very well designed. So professionals that work with risks and payments, you know that, right? I was talking about that earlier today. But for PIX, I think we're still lacking a more centralized structure so that you can approve things immediately. If there is a fraud suspicion, you're going to send it to a database to analyze and check it. So we need to also to organize as a sector, right? So let's zoom out a bit and thinking about this platform. So let's say that we also need to interact more with staff members in the sector. So next year I'm going to ask what changed. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your participation in this panel. Thank you.